While studying the advent and spread of Renaissance, we saw that the ideas could only be spread because of a prime factor. Can you recall it? It is the growth of wealth. Now we see that the growth of surplus wealth provided a push to the Renaissance ideas. So we can understand that the very ideas that ultimately provided a push or created the era of Renaissance and Reformation were also the causes behind the rise of Industrial Revolution. Now, we have also, seen the fact that where exactly was this capital wealth being derived from? Because trade was the main reason behind the growth of this capital wealth that we are discussing about. Now, where was, this wealth coming from? If you remember the fact that new trade routes had been established during the times of Renaissance, the trade routes to the east were opened up and new trade routes were developed. Now, because of these new trade routes that were being found during the age of Renaissance, we saw that this led to a growth of commerce and a bustling economy. So, because this economy kept growing, because this economy got an impetus, and new trade routes were coming up, we see that not only is it promoting the Renaissance ideas, but also the ideas that came after Renaissance. If you look at the map on your screen right here, then you'll be able to see three routes, the three trade routes in the map. The trade route located in red that starts from Venice here and goes on all the way to Beijing is the trade route to China, right? So we see that, from Europe, we are moving towards Asia and then to China. Now the second route moves from, again, because this route is going from Venice to Beijing, there's a route that again leads to Venice. So from here, again from Beijing, it is crossing the Indochina portion, moving around India and then moving up towards Constantinople and then to Venice. So these were the two routes. So one back from Beijing and one leading to Beijing. And of course, the most important trade route of that time that was developed was the Silk Road or the Silk Route. So that Silk Route took, it originated somewhere around the Antioch-Damascus position, and then it went ahead, so it crossed Baghdad, Samarkand, Tashkent, and finally went to Changhan. So of course, this Silk Route was also a route that crossed the Chinese borders, and it was included in the Chinese trade route as well. So as you can imagine that a vast trade route will always garner a kind of commerce that will provide a push, provide an impetus to the growth of economy in that region. Now, because of these improved new trade routes, merchants with capital were ready to invest their capital in further growth. Now, of course, as you can even see in this map particularly, we did not only have at that point of time land routes. The land routes are marked in the red dotted lines. So it was not only the land routes but also the water routes. So right from here, from Venice, we can see the water routes traveling all the way to Nanjing here, okay? So this water route, land route, and the routes that we have discussed earlier, we see that these routes are therefore garnering a trade and a commerce and a bustling economy. Now, of course, the merchants would want to invest this economy somewhere. They would want to invest in this economy very obviously to procure more profits that they could sell via these routes. Now, therefore, when this entire idea of creating new products to be sold through these routes came along, when capital wealth was growing in the hands of these new merchants, we see that the idea of production is shifting. But how so? In order to sort of answer that question, we need to delve into the causes of industrial revolution. Now, you might have a question here that, primarily the occupation of the people was agriculture. So how did that change to trade and commerce? So the very first idea is that the livelihood of the people that we have been discussing about, the people in the countryside, it was primarily dependent on land and agriculture. How and why did that change? We see that, primarily when the feudal sort of structure existed, so when feudalism existed, people were tied to the land. They were tied to the production, process of grains and, food production primarily. So during the medieval times, then people only had to focus on production and land because the feudal system, made that structure and that was to be maintained. But after feudalism collapsed in Europe, it took down the feudal economy with it, and the lord-serf relationship that existed primarily did not exist anymore, right? So with the fall of feudalism and the feudal economy, of course the lord and a serf relationship that existed because of this particular structure was not there anymore, because a feudal lord did not exist. Now what was the lord-serf relationship? It was that the serf was given a portion of the land that he had to cultivate and work on. Now the produce that would come out of the land, a portion of the produce was given to the serf, but the higher portion would have to be given away to the lord. So we can understand that the lord and the serf, both of these people, they were tied ultimately to the land, which collapsed when the feudal economy fell, when feudalism declined. So peasants were not tied down to the exploitative structure anymore, firstly. Secondly, the most important thing was that there came a change in the entire economic structure. Now, of course, when one sort of economic structure collapses or there is a decline in that, which happened in case of feudal economy, there is a gap that is formed. Now, some economic form or the other has to come up to fill that form, to generate wealth, of course. That only was taken over by privatization. So, the second factor that, that freed people from this lord-serf relationship, or the structure that tied them down to the land, was the fact that the land itself was becoming privatized. So it wasn't the peasant holding anymore. Now this privatization happened because of the enclosure movement. And how did this enclosure movement come along? This enclosure movement was established by the Enclosure Act enacted in 1801. Now, the methodology of privatization was aimed at, of course, filling the gap. So privatization aimed at deriving absolute capital from the land. And when you have to sort of derive entire capital, that holding has to be yours and not the peasant. Now, of course, when these peasants are looking at a factor when, they don't even have the land anymore because it is not their own land, there is no incentive why or how they should stay back, right? Now, people therefore started to think of new avenues of earning. So they were now more inclined to look at new avenues of livelihood. Because the primary reason was the land was becoming privatized, as we saw, and it wasn't peasant holding anymore. There wasn't any incentive that the peasant had. People were not tied down to their land anymore by the lord-serf relationship because of the factor that feudal economy collapsed primarily. Now, it was not just the factor that the feudal economy is declining and people want to look for new livelihood or they want to search for new avenues. The want has to be met with means, right? They can only move out when they have another option to move into, right? Because they needed a livelihood, right? Now, what exactly happened was this opportunity was given by an advancement that was taking place. So we have discussed the fact that new trading systems were developed because merchants now had a lot of money in their hands. And that started to grow because of trade and commerce. So the money also started to grow and the new systems of trade also started to grow. Now, this gave rise to merchants who were wealthy, number one, and who looked forward to creating new avenues to create products. So, as we were discussing the fact that they would want more products that they could sell, right? That could be traded. So, we see that this want of a new livelihood and this want of making products that could be sold was reciprocated. So we see that people are now moving out of the rural areas to cities in search of work. So the idea was that they were migrating to new cities in search of secondary work, which became a lucrative option. Now, this secondary work is a term that we need to keep in mind because agriculture was still their primary activity. It was, not absolutely dispensed off with. So, secondary activity was a lucrative option because new cities were coming up at that point of time due to these wealthy merchants. So we see that mass migrations are happening. Now, when the land is not yours, then you can't expect a lot of incentive out of it. Now, you will have to think of an alternative. That is why mass migrations are happening, which is giving rise to far more newer cities. So, of course, urbanization will have to take place in order for, the area to accommodate these many people who were migrating. So new cities and towns came up which were centered around growing factories. So the factory system was coming up at this point of time when these people were moving to the cities, establishing themselves around the factory work. So essentially they were moving out for the factory work itself. So just to recapitulate, we saw that the lands were being taken away from the peasants by the Enclosure Act, and to search for an alternative source of income, they were going to the cities where the factories were growing that provided them that source of income. So that primarily becomes the entire cause behind the migration. And we can also say that this migration, this reduction of land, increase of migration created a surplus labor. So the most important factor here is the surplus labor, which of course was answered by the opening opportunities. What were these opening opportunities? These were the factories that were being built by the merchants. So this factor of surplus laborers was answered by the opening opportunities, which was a primary reason behind the Industrial Revolution to take place, because industries cannot function without the backing of the laborers. Now, so we have answered the very fact that these factories were coming up. So we have already discussed about this factor that the factories were coming up, the laborers were moving outside. But what modes do this factory have, or the factory system have, that can create these many products or the mass products that the traders are looking at? Because of course when the traders will be investing money, they will also want the return maybe double than what they have invested. So what exactly were the modes, and how could the factories create something that the traders wanted to trade with. So here we can see the riddle where, you know, there are three aspects to be filled in order to have this factory work, right? Have this factory function. But we do not know yet what this factory will be producing. So the fact that laborer is the backbone to the factories that were developing has already been answered. So our riddle is solved here, that the first factor are the laborers. Now that is already answered because of the migrations that are happening. There is a surplus amount of labor which is moving to the cities to work in the factories. But how will the laborers work in the factories, you know, if they have to create products that can be sold as in mass production? Because see, laborers or people were creating products even before factories came up, but that was time consuming. Those were handmade products, and here the merchants were looking at you know, mass produced products that they could sell in bulk. So how would that happen? That could only be solved by the creation of machines. So the laborers plus the machines would create certain products that the merchants could trade with. Now, this innovation in the machinery or the machine structure in the factory was brought first by the revolutionary invention of the spinning jenny. So spinning jenny was a revolutionary change in textile production because it not only sort of changed the course of production of textiles, but it also sped up the process of how textiles would be produced, reducing the amount of work and of course increasing the amount of output. Now this revolutionary change was chanced upon, so it took place in Lancashire in England, and it was created in 1770. Can you tell me, cotton textiles came up first in which portion in England? Was it Lancashire, Manchester, Birmingham or Lancaster? The answer will be Lancashire. So therefore we see that cotton textiles are quickly coming up at this point of time. You know, as soon as the spinning jenny revolutionized the world of production of textile, we see you know, cotton being produced, yarns being produced, and cotton textiles quickly come up in not just Lancashire but in Manchester, and it spread across England. So we see that cotton textiles are dotting the map quite quickly, and new cities are also growing around the industries, right, to be filled with cotton mills producing cotton. So cotton was the first product that was being produced, that was being mass produced by these factories. Now another push, another impetus was given by the invention of water frame. Now water frame was patented by Richard Arkwright, and what exactly this did was this made the process of spinning automatic. So till the time spinning jenny was there, a laborer had to be there while sort of making the yarns and the threads and the spindles, right? But after Arkwright created the water frame, this entire thing almost became automatic. So now we already know that there are machines. We have received our laborers primarily. But what else was to be added in order for the factory setup to finish, so that the factory can produce goods? That factor is power, because machines cannot function without power. All these machines now were starting to be automated with Arkwright's invention of the water frame, right? And it was only power that could be you know, used to make these machines work. But even you know, before new ideas of power came, there was the idea of hydraulic power, there was the idea of wind power. But those were not adaptable to the factory system because it couldn't be used for a long time and it couldn't be used to produce mass products. So it was not strong enough. This idea of power was taken up and was revolutionized because of the invention of Watt's steam engine. Watt's steam engine, that was invented by James Watt, not only powered cotton, iron and food grain industries, it also powered mining industries and became the backbone to locomotives that came into being in 1803. So not only was the steam engine used to back the new industries that were coming, the mining industries, the coal industries, food grain industries, but also, how the production will happen was answered. But exactly how will these goods be transported, that was also answered when locomotives started using the steam engine. So now we have seen that we have our laborers, our machines and the power to make all of this functioning, which of course gives rise to a fully functioning factory. But what will a fully functioning factory produce? It will produce absolutely finished goods that are ready to be traded. So we see that these innovations or these ideas only came in place when the scientists, the great minds in Europe, in England, decided to create these new innovations. So we can say that these people had a practical bent of mind, these scientists had a practical acumen, that they created such things which would generate economy in England, which could generate economy in Europe, that would ultimately make the wealth grow for the nation as well as for the people associated with it. So we can say that the scientists had a practical mind to create such innovations that would help people grow the economy. Now these famous scientists that you see from left to your right can be named. Firstly, Eli Whitney, the Wright brothers, Nikola Tesla, James Watt, Samuel Morse, Nicholas Otto, Thomas Edison, George Stephenson, Henry Bessemer, and Richard Arkwright. So as you can see, a lot of these names are very famous. For example, the Wright brothers, Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, these scientists are the scientists we grew up hearing about. So imagine these scientists back then creating such innovations that were required for the society to generate wealth. So we see that factories have already produced the finished goods. They have got all the modes of production, the means of production, as well as the output of production. But what will happen after the finished goods are made? So these finished goods were of course to be transported. But how would this transportation happen? This transportation would take place through steam trains, steam ships, and steam cars that were being used because of the innovation at that point of time. But you might have a question here that where exactly are these goods going to, and where exactly are these goods sort of headed towards? Why are these goods being made anyway? Now, if you remember, we have discussed about the fact that during the Renaissance age, there were new routes and new colonies that were being found by the great voyages. So we know the voyage of Vasco da Gama, the voyage of Columbus, all these sort of voyagers went ahead and started colonizing places. So in the age of Renaissance, there were new voyages that opened up new trade routes, as well as they started taking in new colonies. So Europe had found new colonies that could provide it with raw materials for the production of the goods and also a market to sell their own goods. So not only were these places, these colonies, a place where they could sort of acquire raw materials in cheap, but also a place where they could sell their products at a higher rate. So these colonies, right here, if you look at the map, we have various colonizers, and here we have the colonies that have been established, right? We have here Africa taken up, India, portions of Russia, okay? Then we have portions in North America. So various colonizers had established their colonies. So European colonies were spread all across the world, and that is because they also needed a captive market that they could sell their products in. So we see that there is an international trading system. There is an overseas international trading system that is established, and this depended on the chain of export and import of goods. So we see that machine-made goods are being exported to colonies that could be sold in the colonial markets, whereas goods are also being imported from the colonies that were sold at much higher rates in Europe, thus to gain maximum profit. Now this entire factor of export and import dependent on the supply and demand. The supply and demand between the relationship of the Europe and its colonies. So here in the map, as you can see that slaves were being sent to America. So there's a triangle that is established. This is the triangle trading system also. And sugar and tobacco and cotton was going to Europe from the North American portions. We see that textile, rum, are manufactured, and goods were being sent to Africa from the European portion. So goods were being transported from the colonies as well as from the colonizers' places. So if we try to quickly recapitulate the causes behind the Industrial Revolution, we see first is the growth of surplus wealth, without which Industrial Revolution would not have been possible. Second, Enclosure Act that augmented the mass migration. Mass migration that became a major factor that supported the laborers' needs in the factories. Surplus labor, because more amount of labor would mean that the factories could employ more amount of people to produce more amount of products. A practical bent of mind of the scientists who created the innovations, who made it the Industrial Revolution so that the factories could function. Inventions of new machines, without which a factory system would not even have been possible. And of course, the growth of international trade, without which the goods could not be, traded, and neither could raw materials be acquired. So as we saw, all these factors sort of, created an environment that provided this impetus to an industrial change, an industrial revolution. But we can also very well state that an industrial revolution came only as a reaction to whatever was happening around the society. So it was a reaction to all of these events that were taking place one by one. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.